Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome wherever you may be joining us today to the Florida Alliance for Community Solutions, our portion of the Resilient Communities Summit. We're so grateful to have you join us. My name is Stephen Ponzillo. I am joining you today from Tampa, Florida, and I am proud to be the Associate Vice President and Community Relations Officer for Regions Bank here in West, Central, and South Florida. At Regions, our mission is to make life better for our customers, for our associates, and especially for our communities. And of course, that's what our focus is all about today. So as we
Stephen, I'm sorry, we just lost you.
how about now?
You're back.
I think you muted me by accident, but that's okay. It's because I talk so much, Terry.
No.
where I was hopefully leaving off without repeating is as we start today's session on how we preserve our Black communities across Florida, across all of our states, across the world, how do we focus on gentrification, the negative impacts it has had, and how do we prevent it? How do we stop it? How do we mitigate it in all forms? So we have a distinguished panel today, and before I introduce them, just a few housekeeping items. We've all been on Zoom and virtually collectively, but please do take a moment now to make sure that you are on mute during the presentations or in the panelists. This is, of course, a safe space for us all to be able to communicate and chat. Specifically, when it comes to chat, please do, whether it's in the middle of one of our panelists or at the end, please do enter a question that you have into the chat. I will be monitoring that throughout the entire session, and we'll take our questions and do questions and answers right at the end. As you probably have seen, we're recording this session, and we do have closed caption enabled if anyone now or who joins us as we continue needs that service. Finally, our session materials, I should say, will be shared. So that's one question you don't have to put in the chat. We will share our distinguished panelist presentations with you about a week from now, if not sooner, to make sure that you have that, and particularly a way to contact them and follow up with questions for the work that you do in your neighborhood. And at the very end, we'll do a very quick virtual 3-question evaluation to make sure that we at the Florida Alliance are providing you with the best training, the best learning possible. I feel very confident that today as I introduce our panelists. So without further ado, let me introduce them in order, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming them. Twanda Bradley is a product of the African proverb. She was raised by the village, and that would be Progress Village in Tampa, Florida. She has a bachelor's of administration from Nova University and started her 30-year information technology career with Verizon, formerly GTE, Data Services. Now she uses her skills and knowledge in her small businesses and provides administrative and organizational assistance to small business officers to reduce their stress and to really help them thrive. In her spare time, I'm not sure how much she could possibly have, but she tells me she does. She's dedicated to Progress Village and to many organizations in our area that help those that are looking for a hand up. Second, we have Dr. Irvin Pedro Cohen. He is the executive director of LISC in Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Cohen received his bachelor's degree in sociology from the University of North Florida, an MBA in marketing from Pfeiffer University, and his doctorate in organizational leadership and urban education from Nova Southeastern. His research is centered on the social well-being, education, healthcare, economics, etc., of low socioeconomic communities, the role of the African American Church, and he serves on the advisory board for the University of Florida's Clinical Translation Science Institute and Vanderbilt University's Recruitment Innovation Center. Certainly last but not least is our friend Latonya Smith. She is a staff attorney with Three Rivers Legal Services, and she's coming to us today from Jacksonville, Florida. She works exclusively on the heirs property program which includes education, community outreach, estate planning, probate litigation, and more. She's going to tell us much more about that today. Prior to joining the firm, she was an owner of Lipscomb Smith Law, serving clients in the areas of probate and estates, family law, and criminal law. She's licensed in both Florida and Georgia and has been honored as an outstanding pro bono service winner from Jacksonville Legal Aid. Team, this is a wonderful group of amazing panelists today. So I will turn things over to Latonya, but I hope you will join me in welcoming all three and thanking them by sharing your questions as we continue along. Ms. Bradley, please go ahead.
Well, good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank Terry for asking me to be a part of the summit. It is so important to be able to speak about the village. And so thank you for the platform. Also, I want to thank the panelists for allowing me to be a part of the panel, Dr. Cohen and Attorney Smith. It's a pleasure to serve with you all. Again, my name is Twanda Bradley, and I'm from Progress Village. Progress Village is a small city, not city, but a small little community that's been in existence for a very long time. So if you look at the map I have here, you'll see that where Progress Village lies, it's just a nugget in the corner of an area. When I was born back in the 60s, well, I'm telling my age, I guess, but when I was born, the village was standalone. We had woods around us. We had cow pastures around us. We were in the dark, just in the dark. Now today it's expanded so much, and I'll talk about a little of that later on. But Progress Village, mainly, I just want you all to know that Progress Village, the purpose of it, I was told as a kid, how we got our name was there was a group of individuals that wanted progress for African Americans. If you see on our next slide here, you see the beginning. So in the beginning, we were the first affordable housing for African Americans in Tampa, which is more on the south side of Tampa. Now, if you live in Tampa, you may hear someone talk about South Tampa, and you may hear someone say East Tampa, but they're not talking about Progress Village, and we're truly the southeast of Tampa. So when I speak of Progress Village, I talk about South Tampa, southeastern Progress Village. Let me tell you why. If you travel to the south side of town, it's very, those are the individuals that have more monies, if I can use those words. They are more economically inclined to get what they need. If you travel to the east of us, when people speak of East Tampa and when there's help being taken place in the east side of Tampa, well, they're not talking about Progress Village. They're talking about the central part of Tampa. So on the southeastern side of Tampa, you will find Progress Village. As said before, we were developed in the 60s. So development announced a plan to construct the historical African-American neighborhood in 1958. And then in 1960, the very first residents moved in. Believe it or not, that young man is still alive. He's 99 years old. His name is Emmanuel P. Johnson. And if you ever had a chance to speak with Mr. Emmanuel, and that's what we call him, Mr. Emmanuel, halftime, because he would speak of Progress Village for hours. So he's still alive, and we're so proud that at least one of the first residents is still alive there. When Progress Village was developed, less than 100 residents were there, and we only had 300 homes. Now, those 300 homes today, if you speak to someone in Progress Village, they will call it Unit 1. And I'll speak more about the units later. Unit 1, approximately 100 homes. The homes at that time, the average mortgage was less than $60. Yes, less than $60,000. You'll hear more about where we stand today. When we moved out there, as mentioned before, there were no street lights, there was no transportation, there was no postal service, there was nothing but darkness and the light bugs that lit up at night and large mosquitoes. Also in Progress Village in the beginning, we birthed something called the Progress Village Civic Council. And the Progress Village Civic Council is part of what I am today. I stand very strong for Progress Village. Anything that goes on in the village, it goes through the council. I serve as the first vice with the Progress Village Civic Council, and we have our president, Linda Washington. We have I'm first vice. Our second vice is Leslie Jackson. Then we also have our treasurer, which is none other than Mr. Alfred can't remember his last name, but Alfred, we have a whole team. And we're still thriving some 60 years later. And the reason for that organization, or the development of that organization, is to support the village and keep it alive. And we're struggling with that, and I'm hoping you all can help us later on in this conversation. Also, at the beginning, we started off with 3 churches. The first church was First Baptist of Progress Village, which is still thriving. Right behind it, months later, the second church, which is St. James, now called Victory African Methodist Episcopal Church. We were second, and that's the church that I'm a member of. And the third one that developed within the early 60s was Harris Temple United Methodist Church. So where there is, where the heart of the village is the church. The church is there, and you'll hear more about the churches later in my presentation. Last but not least, in the early 60s, very early 60s, we had the Progress Village Elementary School that was developed. Some of our, when it was first developed, of course, we didn't have teachers that looked like us, but very soon afterwards we did. Now, in the year that I was born, of course, we saw segregation, and eventually we saw integration, and I'll talk about that a little longer as well. So the progress, we call ourselves Progress in the Village. There's progress in the village. If you look at the top of the monitor, you'll see that we had no street lights, as mentioned. Public transportation was not there, and postal service wasn't there. We moved, we evolved, we started progressing. We became known for our recreational park. In the recreational park, we had different sports teams that were developed. We started off with what we call the Little Leaguerettes. That was with young girls, our little girls, myself. We were able to play softball, slow pitch softball. Not only did we have that for the girls, we had it for the guys too. We had little leagues for the guys. We developed a Girl Scout troop. My mom was one of the first to help develop that, along with Marguerite Prince. And then we have Boy Scout troops that were developed in Progress Village. We didn't stop there. We got a community pool. Believe it or not, we had a community pool for a few years. Because lack of sponsorship, we ended up having to close it down. It was located at the Parks and Rec, but eventually it got shut down. Continual progress in the village. There was and still is a neighborhood plaza. We had our own 7-Eleven back in the 60s. Not only our own 7-Eleven, we have a barbershop. One of the major people, Frances Pasco, that had her own barbershop, she's still alive. She's retired and no longer has the business, but the shopping plaza still exists, and we have other people there. A couple more things that happened in the plaza was jewelry stores and restaurants. So if you're in Progress Village, you'll see where we still have some functionality of the plaza. It's also now owned, the plaza itself is now owned by one of the founders, which is Mr. Bowers, is owned by him now, but it's still part of us. A couple more things, as I said before, we started off with 3 churches. What we developed now, we have 5 churches in the village. We now have a Seventh-day Adventist and another Baptist church in the village. Last but not least, we have over 900 homes in the village. I said before we had Unit 1, now we have Unit 2 and Unit 3. If you cross the boulevard, which is Progress Village Boulevard, you'll see where Unit 1 is sectioned by itself. And the larger part of the village, that's where the other roughly 600 homes and a couple of churches are there. So that's Unit 1 and Unit 2 on the other side. So bottom line is Progress Village consists of what we consider 3 units, Unit 1, Unit 2, and Unit 3. And the elementary that I mentioned before is no longer the elementary, but it's still named Progress Village. It's Progress Village Middle Magnet. So we have evolved, we have progress, and now I will talk about where we are physically at. So now where we are is there is a Larry Sanders Sports Complex that has been built. However, it's not in the village, it's across the street from the village, but we made sure that one of our very own, Larry Sanders, he is an individual that was raised in the village. His family is still in the village, so the complex is named after him. The second line you see here is Emmanuel P. Johnson Center. As I mentioned before, Mr. Emmanuel is one of the founders of Progress Village, or correction, the first one to move into Progress Village. So our community center there has his name on it as well, just to make sure that Progress Village still is not lost pretty much in all of these things. The Middle Magnet School, it is thriving, a lot of arts. The concerning parts there, and we'll talk about that later, is majority of the students there are not from the village, but it's the village, right? Again, the 5 schools, their homes, and so on forth, so forth. We're so proud of Progress Village that we have developed the Progress Village City Council, started a family reunion for the village. And we have done this for the past, the council did it for about 3 years. And then we had an individual that took it over in the community, and he actually lives in Atlanta, but he, along with others that were raised in the village, they now run the annual village reunion. Last but not least, another annual event we have in the village right now is the Back to School Bash. We have 2 of them. We have the Back to School Bash where my church, which is Victory AME, we put on the bash, as well as our sister church, First Baptist, they too put on a Back to School Bash. A couple of things that are not mentioned here that the village really does well is we support one another. We support one another by having different individual ministries within the village. We have my church, Victory AME. We have a pantry, as well as First Baptist and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They too have pantries that they run throughout the months, just to keep the people fed where needed and clothed where needed. So that's where we are now. That's where we're now. But we have a fight. We have a fight that's going on. And when I say the fight, not us fighting against each other or what have you, but help. And that's why I'm speaking to you all today, and how to keep us thriving, how to preserve us. Our fight starts off with the Progress Village Civic Council. As mentioned before, Progress Village Civic Council is the, for lack of a better term, is the head of the village, meaning that we try to oversee. We do not dictate what can happen in the village, but we educate, do our best to educate the residents. So Progress Village City Council still working on poor street lighting. It's been years that we've taken petitions, we've done it all, and we still have poor lighting. Very, very dark. Pretty much the original lights that were put out there over what, 60 years ago. That level of lighting is very dim. So something that we're still fighting for and hoping that it'll change in the near future. Toxic environment. That's a very big one for us. Right, less than 2 miles from us, we have a company, Mosaic is the name of it, with chemical Egyptian power. Not healthy for us at all. One of the things that they try to satisfy us with is providing our foundation, because we do have a Progress Village Foundation that helps with the education of the kids in the village. They gave us, or still do give us, a small stipend for scholarships. And when I say small stipend, what is money when it compares to someone's help? And currently today, we are getting roughly, I think it's about 10,000 or so, and it goes to the foundation, but it's still impacting our health. We do have some studies that are going on, trying to see how has it directly impacted individuals there. So that's a concern. Another concern we have is with TECO Power. TECO Power, one of our major concerns is the runoffs and the flood storms, storm waters, how they would come down into the village. Flooding is a huge problem with us. We've been fighting that for over 20 years, trying to eliminate that issue. Now, I didn't know this on a couple of days ago that our Commissioner Gwen Myers, she's looking to have a meeting with us. And we've gone over meetings. We changed commissioners, former commissioners, and we still have that problem. So now she's coming in. We're looking to have her to help us some kind of way to get rid of that problem. Gentrification, as we talked about before. What can I say? We are feeling the impact, not in a good way. The community is not educated on how all this is happening. Investors are purchasing the homes, but they're not investing into the homes or into the community. And now our homes that I talked about before, we spent what, 60 grand, $60 for your mortgage. The homes now are pricing over $200,000. So what does that do? I'll tell you what we see happen to us. In the 2020 census, we noticed a huge change. According to the 2010 census, our population was only 5,392. But in 2020, it increased 85%, over 85%. Well, guess what happened? There was some rezoning that took place. We saw the signs, but didn't know what was happening. Going back to that educational lack of, right? So we saw how they rezoned us. So that expanded us from 5,000, over 5,000 to over 10,000, which increased our taxes, it increased many things. It gave us the population of whites a little over 4,000. Blacks and African Americans is 4,200, a little less, right? You walk into the village, that is not what it is. The village is about 98% African Americans, but because they rezoned, it looked totally different, which is not fair to us, So we're feeling the impact. We're feeling the impact on our taxes. We're feeling the impacts on our insurances as well. So we need help. So I'm here just to talk about Progress Village because we are proud. We're proud of our history and we want to remain there. We are Progress Village proud, PV proud. We're very proud of who we are and where we are. But most importantly, we're PV for life. So if you all can do anything to help us to better understand, push us forward, to support the village and not be swallowed by the new wave gentrification, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Twanda, we really appreciate your time. And I want to make sure when we get to question and answer, my first question to you is for us to talk more specifically about some of the ways that we can help. But right now, I want to turn things over to Dr. Cohen. I know you've heard before, Dr. Cohen, but you're on mute. We've all been there. I've already been there today.
Okay, there you go.
We got
again,
you now. Thank you.
I want to echo Twanda's sentiments and say thank you all for being here. And I just really want to frame the conversation around, who LISC is. And I'm trying to advance this slide here. But it doesn't seem to, is it advancing?
No.
We can see your photo right now. The photo you have up for resilient communities.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say this. I'll just go ahead. I'm not seeing how it's not letting me advance the slide to the next one, and that may be something on my end. But nonetheless, I'll just do the presentation, and if anyone has any questions, so that for sake of time, I don't hold us up. But my name is Dr. Irvin Pedro Cohen, and I am the executive director of LISC Jacksonville. And what LISC is, for those of you all who don't know, I always like to start with, what does LISC actually stand for? LISC is an acronym for Local Initiative Support Corporation. And what we are is a financial/social intermediary. And together with residents and partners, LISC forges resilient and inclusive communities throughout the area of Jacksonville. And so, again, we have strategies that include economic development, social development. And as I like to tell people about us and who we are really the voice of the community. I like to think that we play in places and we operate in spaces that maybe not everyone from the community has the opportunity to be at the table. And so what I want to talk about specifically as it relates to those traditional Black enclaves like a Promise Village, that and our work there. And I'll start with our work. You saw the picture earlier as it relates to our work around resiliency, and it started with Project Boots. And, what I like to think our approach to this, judging from the sociologist in me, that we've had a three-pronged approach. And I like to call it the three stages, the three legs to the LISC stool. And the first stage for me is really an ethological approach to the work of fighting of gentrification, particularly in traditional Black neighborhoods, is redefining the gentry. And what I mean by redefining the gentry is we typically, it starts with having an honest conversation and being intentional about your work. Typically, when we discuss gentrification, the first thing that comes to mind is usually white, young couple who are moving into an area that traditionally has served as primarily a BIPOC community. And what we've started, with our project and specifically Project Boots is we redefined the gentry. And by what we mean by redefine the gentry, we said to people, why not move back into your own neighborhood? And that has traditionally been something that hasn't been discussed, from the vantage of people of color in particular. We've always been taught that once you make it, however you define make it, you take your resources and you move somewhere else, and then your community becomes a passerby. And so we've decided that, what we want to do is we want to bring people who see themselves in light of the community rather than in spite of the community, and start with bringing them back. And so those were the initial people that we reached out to relative to Project Boots. And for me, if we're again being honest around the intent, it was for me to connect the dots. And what I mean by connect the dots, it was simply bringing someone who at the very foundation education has worked for, and disrupting a bad information source. And what I mean by bad information source, it's people who have the information that could have the capacity to change people's lives. And so our first cohort of people back into the neighborhood are doctors, teachers, service people, who all again see themselves in light of the community and understand some of the indigenous relationships and indigenous things that happen within that community. The second part of that stool for us centered around really a philosophical approach, and that is you don't sort of regentrify a neighborhood without having the people who are current residents involved in the process. And for us, what that looks like is a program around home repair and home rebuild. So we've had a process in place where we've dedicated resources to those residents who are indigenous to the community, who actually own their own homes and just need some simple repairs to their houses. And so we put a budget together that's associated with that. And that number goes up anywhere from $15,000 to about $25,000 that residents in the neighborhood have access to. But the one thing that we also made sure that they do, again, they have to own their own homes. And so in owning their own homes, they're able to access those dollars to do some small repairs. And we also have worked with contractors who, again, are indigenous to the community. The only requirement that we required for the contractors is that you have to be licensed and insured. We don't want people who are not certified in an area, no matter how good people in the neighborhood say you are. If you're that good, then we've encouraged you to go get the adequate certifications to be able to do the repairs on people's homes. So we've incorporated the indigenous people that are already living in the neighborhood in the process. And then the last part of the stool really deals with our ontological response to what needs to happen. And that centers around heirs property. I know Latoya will talk about that later during her presentation, but that's been our response to the process. So if you take all of those things together, they really represent LISC's approach to how do we really stave off gentrification as we currently know it, and really redefine the idea of gentrification. One of the things when I'm talking about bringing new residents back to the neighborhood, we recognize that those people who we wanted to see back in the neighborhood, you know, they needed an incentive. And so we worked with some of our funders in the area, and in return for really completing a 12-month program, and that program centered on, because for us in our office, moving back into the neighborhood meant more than just literally buying a house on a street in this under-resourced neighborhood. It meant, what does it mean to be a resident in this neighborhood? And sort of setting the groundwork of family wealth creation. It set the groundwork around healthcare. It set the groundwork for many things that we wanted to see in order for this neighborhood to be better today than it was yesterday, and better tomorrow than it is currently. And so all of those things went into to space, and we started a matching savings program for those 5 residents to potentially move back into the neighborhood. And the only requirement in order to have access to that down payment and closing cost assistance was not only do you attend the 12-month program, which is 2 hours every month for 12 months, but also that you maintain the house for at minimum 3 years. So for 3 years, we get a chance to put a school teacher in between a CNA or a cashier at Walmart. So again, they get an opportunity to see that this idea of education does work. And one of the biggest things that, when we were putting this thing together in our office was, how do we get better product, quite frankly, into the neighborhood schools, people that understand the importance of education. And so that's why it was important for us to go get people and say to them and incent them, quite frankly, to say to them to live in these neighborhoods. And it is our belief that if you redefine the gentry, you engage Indigenous people in the process, and you deal with the history of people in terms of heirs property, then you get a better populace into the neighborhood. And then again, you get to redefine what the gentry is, rather than look at gentrification as necessarily a bad thing. And it's my belief that we only look at gentrification when we're on the outside looking in, rather than on the inside looking out. And that's how we've been intentional in our work relative to really changing the landscape of these enclaves, again, that were traditionally BIPOC communities that are now seeing themselves being pushed out. We are bringing people back in and allowing them to set the tone for what the neighborhood should and ought to be, rather than someone else moving in and changing it for them. So that's pretty much my story, and I'll pass it on back to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cohen. That is a beautiful story. There's many comments in the chat and some questions that we'll get to later for more specifics, just like we will with Twanda. But as you referenced, we want to give Latonya a chance to talk about that third leg of the stool more in her work that you just described, in working to make sure that heirs can continue to stay in their family homes for generations to come. So Latonya, I'll turn things over to you.
Let's see. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you to Stephen and to Terry for the invitation for me to come and speak. As been mentioned, my name is Latonya Lipscomb-Smith, and I'm an attorney with Three Rivers Legal Services. I work exclusively on the heirs property project here at Three Rivers. And I actually came out of private practice to work on this program because it was near and dear to my heart. I'm married, and on my husband's side, this is an issue that hits close to home. So it was really a good calling to come and do this type of work full time. But you've heard through other presentations about the term heirs property, but what is it exactly legally? It is land or property who passes from someone who dies, usually without a will, to living heirs. It's resulting in shared ownership between multiple family members as tenants in common. The problem with this is when I heard it in a presentation a little while ago that the speaker, she had said, we all die with a will, every one of us. The question that we ask ourselves is, who is the author of that will? Do you want the author to be yourself, or do you want it to be the state legislatures? And I'm a control freak, and I think most people are. You want to be the author of your own will. And when the state is the author of our will, that's when it gets complicated. And when you own heirs property with multiple family members, take into consideration, this is not just maybe you and your siblings. This could be your nieces, your great nieces and nephews. And so it just gets very complicated, very convoluted. The problems with heirs property, there's a whole myriad of problems that we run into. You have an increased risk of forced sale and eviction. And this is what I call triage. So when clients come to us, there's already a foreclosure going on. And so they come to us and say, I cannot renegotiate the mortgage. I cannot refinance because they are not the owners. And mortgage companies will not talk to heirs to property. They will talk to homeowners. So they come to us and we have to very quickly probate their estate, their loved one's estate. And if anyone has ever been involved in the legal process, it is a long and protracted process. It is not very swift. So it takes time. And when we are operating against the clock of a foreclosure, we are at the behest of, especially if it's a full administration, we are at the behest of the mortgage company to wait and put in some time measures to give us time in order for us to go through the litigation process. Another problem is you cannot sell or mortgage the property without an agreement of all of the heirs. So let's say I have one case where we have 25 heirs. 25 family members own a piece of property together. Imagine trying to get everyone in agreement in terms of wanting to sell the property. It's not going to happen. It's very complicated. You cannot qualify for rehab programs or secure financing for needed repairs. Dr. Cohen just spoke to us about the great work that LISC does. And I have to also take a moment. LISC is one of our community funders here in Jacksonville, Florida, and we are working with them on heirs property in certain communities in Duval County and helping them with heirs property work. But when someone from LISC comes to us and say that they have funding to help with rehab programs, on our end, we have to probate estates so that the family members can get these homes and pieces of land in their names so that they can qualify for such financing. Also, you're dealing with the government, FEMA, USDA, and other agencies. Here in Florida, we are prone to hurricanes. Fortunately, for the past couple of years in Northeast Florida, we have not had to deal with a lot of hurricane and storm damage. But the last one that we did 2 to 3 years ago, we had an uptick in cases because we will have a hurricane come and hit. The family members will try to get the roof repaired. And as they're dealing with that process, they find out that they are not actually the owner of the house. The house is in their spouse's name who died years earlier. So that's another issue as well. You cannot qualify for loss mitigation programs when facing foreclosure. As stated earlier, if you are in foreclosure and you are interested in keeping the property, the mortgage company will not talk to you if you do not own it. So we have to work through foreclosure and probate at the same time, which can get very, very tedious. Lack of clear title means that the property is less marketable for sale or for lease. So for us personally at Three Rivers, we work with families to help build legacy, financial ownership for future generations. So we don't necessarily work with families if they are trying to sell their home, but as a homeowner, that is one of the beauties of being a homeowner, is that you can sell and do with the money as you see fit. But if you do not have clear marketable title, a buyer will not come and be interested in purchasing that property to you. Lastly, one owner could force a court-ordered sale of the entire property. This is called a partition sale. And we'll talk later in the slides. We have passed a beautiful statute here in Florida and in other states across the country, the Uniform Partition Heirs Property Act. And so this helps to mitigate all of the bad acts that have historically been a part of partition sales here in Florida. Heirs property, what community is most affected by heirs property is the African American community. In 1920, there were 15 acres of land, mainly in the South, and farmland. 925,000 Black-owned farmers constituted 14% of farms in the US. By 1975, we had a decrease to 45,000 Black-owned farms. And then today, Black Americans, they own less than 2%. They're 2% of less. They are less than 2% of farmers and 1% of rural landowners. And so we are trying to combat that in many states through the combat of heirs property. The Uniform Partition Heirs Property Act, UPHP. This act, it helps to provide protections with the sale of Partition Sales Act. So prior to this act, if you had property that was owned by many family members, one family member could come and petition the court for a partition sale. The rest of the family members, they did not have protected rights in terms of trying to stop the sale, of getting good value if a third party came in and wanted to undersell it. It was it was just a bad way to undercut the other owners who maybe wanted to keep the property and was living in it. This act, it passed in particular in Florida last summer, the summer of 2020. And the major provisions of this act are 5. So one is notice. You have to have notice if you are an owner and you want to partition and sell the property. So conspicuous sign on the property. So it has to be a big sign, notice that there's going to be a partition sale. You have to have an appraisal. This is done by an uninterested real estate appraiser if co-owners don't agree. So based on the act, all of the co-owners of the property could come together to agree to a reasonably priced sale for the property. But if you have one person or a couple that don't think that it's fair, the law says that you can hire an appraisal to come up with a reasonable price. Right of first refusal. So if you have a family member who wants to keep that particular property, they have the right to come in and say, well, I want to go and buy you out. Let's say it's a family of 5 that owns it, and one person can come in and buy the share of that family member who no longer wants to own that property. The sale is now done on an open market sale where you have competition and fair market value. Prior to this act, there was no such thing. Whatever price that this buyer wanted to come in and purchase it for, if the family members were willing to sell it, they could sell it. No open market sale. Partition and kind considerations. This is a wonderful benefit because now the judge can look to sentimentality, meaning how the land is used. So if you have property that's owned by these 5 family members and one person is living in the home, the judge can take into consideration the fact that that family member is living there and that it may not be in that person's best interest to sell it. and may try to come up with other ways in order to save it for that particular family member. Because this act was passed just last summer, right in the heart of COVID, I personally don't know of any cases that has been litigated in Florida, but this is just a wonderful, wonderful act. And as you can see, this was from July of last year. We have a whole slew, we have a whole slew of states that have adopted this. And I will say, I think that there are 2 more states this year that are up to deck to adopt this act. So I gave you problems with heirs property. Let's talk about solutions. In the heirs property project here at Three Rivers, we look at heirs property, one, as a way to educate community leaders and about heirs property and what it is. The second prong is preventative measures through estate planning, and then corrective measures through litigation. So let's say we have already litigated the case through formal or summary administration. We do not want to leave you in the lurch. Now it's about protecting the property for the next generation so that they don't have to go through the same issues. So we have what's called estate planning. And I look at estate planning as a toolbox. When you have a toolbox, you don't have just one particular tool, for example, a screwdriver, and you think that the screwdriver is going to solve every single problem. Same thing with estate planning. There are many different tools that you can use to help to protect your property and your assets for future generations. The most popular is your last will and testament, but I personally do not believe that you should just stop with the will, especially if we are talking about heirs property. You can also deed the property. For example, in Florida, we have a wonderful deed called the Lady Bird deed, also known as the enhanced life estate. This is where you can still own the property and act as if you are the sole owner of the property, but name a person who you want to have inherit from you at the time of your death. And once you pass away, the property will automatically transfer to that other person by operation of law. And that just means that they do not have to go through the court system in order to get the property in their name. So if you have a Lady Bird deed and you are a parent and you want to leave your home to your child, in addition to doing your will for you, we will also draft a Lady Bird deed naming that child as the future vested remainder. And at the time of your death, that child will own that property automatically, and they won't have to pay for probate litigation to get the home in their name. Additionally, we have advanced directives, the durable power of attorney. This is used very sparingly because the durable power of attorney is so popular, is so powerful. But if you are in an incapacitated state, or you feel as though you need an agent to act on your own behalf, that agent through a durable power of attorney has the power to deed property. Under corrective measures, here in Florida, probate litigation through formal administration and summary administration are 2 of the main popular ways to probate. Formal, it can take between 6 to 9 months, depending on the difficulties of contacting family members and finding out assets. Summary administration, the decedent has to be deceased. The decedent can be deceased for 2 or more years, or you have $75,000 or less in assets. That process is a lot shorter. So when clients come to us and they are in a major situation or a time constraint, sometimes we have to tell them that that we're under certain time constraints in terms of how long it will take to probate their litigation. But heirs property, all is not lost. Just know that while there are problems, there are solutions. And so here's my contact information if you want to get in contact with me privately. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Latonya, and don't go anywhere. What I had shared in the chat with the group is they've already shared some amazing questions for all three of you. Some specific ones to you, Latonya. Now, I know you're not today trying to provide your legal advice, but your education, your information to us is extremely valuable. So thank you for your presentation. Thank you to all three of our panelists. We've talked about strategies for how we preserve our very important Black communities, and we're going to continue that with your questions. So Latonya, I'm going to start with you, and two questions that we came to, and they may certainly be intertwined, but they're both from Keisha. And so her first question, I think with all that you shared, and I certainly feel that way when I'm thinking about my family, my parents, there's a lot that you're taking on. It can be very overwhelming when you're in a process with a will being involved for obvious reasons. But if a will is submitted, this is her first question, if a will is submitted and your name is mentioned in that will, what are the next steps that you think that should be taken?
Well, my question is, and not to have a question with the question is, how is your name mentioned? In what capacity are you receiving property or being disinherited? You can disinherit folks in your will. Unfortunately, fortunately, in Florida, you have to be represented by legal counsel to go through probate litigation. And that's one of the reasons why heirs property becomes a problem, is because it costs money to get money, right? So you have to have money up front in order to hire an attorney to go through probate litigation. Hopefully the estate has the money. But more to your question, have a lawyer look at the will, and questions coming to my mind of what are the assets, when did the decedent die, is how to better answer specifically.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this connects right back where you left off with her second question. And when you're talking about having an attorney, no matter which state, and I have to point out, we have folks joining us right now, not only from Florida, but across the country, from Oregon to Illinois, all over the place. And we're so grateful to have you join this Florida Summit session. So obviously the answer may differ depending on state laws, as Latonya mentioned earlier, but Keisha was also asking if joint ownership with the right of survivorship, does that necessarily help you avoid probate, or is that going to happen? And to your point, that's where you'd need to get an attorney on retainer.
Yes. So joint owner with right of survivorship is beautiful. That's beautiful language that we like to use when we draft deeds, because what happens is when you have two individuals with joint owner of survivorship, when the one person dies, the living person retains ownership of the whole property by itself, by operation of law. And when I say by operation of law, that means that you do not have to go through the court system in order to gain your property legally. It happens automatically. So ladybird deed, right of survivorship, tenants by the entirety, all of those are examples of operation of law where property automatically transfers at the time of death of the decedent.
So it sounds like it comes back to your point earlier of if everyone has a will, who's going to be in control of it? Those are the kind of things you can do in advance to not have to then sort through things afterwards.
Correct. And I tell clients or people that I'm presenting to all the time, I'll speak especially to the African American community, since I know it so personally. We don't like to talk about death, right? To speaking death on me, no. If you're going to have health insurance, if you're going to have a homeowner's insurance in case something happens, have a will, have estate planning documents. It's just the same thing. And you're not speaking anything or speaking ill on someone. It is actually an act of love. It's an act of love, and it really helps take the burden off of your family when they can be mourning you and not having to worry about the business of this.
Thank you so much, Latonya. Dr. Cohen, I'm going to come to you for a couple of questions. We'll start with the 30,000-foot questions. There's two that are related. Obviously, folks are so impressed with the three-legged strategy, the stool that you outlined for us, and include me in that group. So folks are just interested in knowing, one, if you all at LISC are a CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution, or those that you partner with. And with you being in LISC Jacksonville, are you focused exclusively on the northeast part of Florida? Do you have partners that you work with in other parts of our state, or for our friends in other states, other regions? How would they go about finding someone who's trying to implement the strategy that you outlined for us?
The first answer is yes, we are a CDFI. And as I responded to the gentleman in the chat, I do consider other opportunities outside of Jacksonville, particularly if they are dealing with affordable housing. Anything outside of that space of affordable housing, I generally am challenged by, but I will be open to having a conversation around it. I think the second thing with us, we developed project boots internally. It was something, when my work outside of LISC, when I came in a little over a year ago, I had this thought in my mind: how do we take the HUD certification program and expand it in particular to address many of the needs that we needed in under-resourced communities? And they extended well beyond just this notion of qualifying for a mortgage. So family wealth creation, and this all kind of stems under LISC's national plan of Project 10X. Excuse me. And so the idea of family wealth creation was a thing. So one of those 2-hour sessions in that 12-month program really centers around insurance as a mechanism of family wealth creation. Another session centers around government and your elected officials in that space. So we bring in the city council person for that district, for this district. We bring in the state house rep person for that district, as well as the school board person for that district. So moving into this community we not only want you to have an acumen around what does it mean to be a homeowner, but we want to have you, sort of informed on what does it mean to be an informed citizen of that community. So now you are electing people who represent you and that can do that have the capacity to inform. The bar, I say, again, we're talking about honesty. The bar in some of our minority serving communities to be elected is so low. It's, who and or, did you serve chicken wings, to the people at a campaign rally and do the electric slide? Well, we want to make sure that we brought in a citizenry who could ask those questions, that had the capacity to change the context and contexture of the neighborhood. So I was very deliberate in when I put it all together. It extended well from the mortgage company, but it extended into things that you and I know make good neighbors and good residents of a community. So that's kind of how we did it internally. And that process is starting to pay dividends for us as more and more people. Our waiting list for people wanting to move back into the neighborhood went from 7 on a Thursday to 67 on a Friday, with people saying, how can I move back into this under-resourced neighborhood where typically, as I said earlier, the process was to get out rather than to stay in. And so that to me, again, is a win for us, and it's more importantly a win for the neighborhood.
That's a win for all of us. I'm so grateful to hear that success story, and thank you for sharing it with us. As our time gets close to coming to a close, Twanda, I wanted to come back to you and just get your reflections on what you heard from Dr. Cohen and from Attorney Smith. I'm sure, I think knowing some of the work that you do a little bit, that having folks involved and engaged, as you mentioned earlier, is definitely always been a fixture in Progress Village. You mentioned, of course, Dr. Cohen has studied the churches and the 5 churches that you have in the area. Are there any things that you heard today that allow us to join with you to be part of a process of preserving Progress Village? Or is there more that we need to do? Certainly you mentioned the zoning, that's something that I heard front and center. But anything else come to mind that we can work with you on?
I would say definitely how to get programs in the village, looking at family wealth, looking at how to preserve the homes in the village, because that is the issue, being ran down homes, not having the finances to support the homes and fixing homes, roofs that's been damaged over time. And definitely when it comes to heir properties, we see a lot of people still live in the village, that grew up in the village, but they're losing the homes, whether it's back taxes or whatever it is. And for some reason, and I think this is the last thing, is educating them on that it's okay to sell to someone within the village. We're seeing that they sell out of the village before they reinvest and sell to someone that grew up in the village or currently live in the village that would like to purchase. So definitely the programs that both Dr. Cohen has, as well as attorney, I forgot her last name, forgive me, attorney Latonya has, will help us in the village, hopefully will. Or something like that. So
I'm glad to hear that. We want to be a part of that as well. So I look forward to connecting with you after this session. It's only 45 minutes or an hour that we can be together, but there's so much that we can all do, all of us that are on this session. I want to thank each of our panelists again, a virtual round of applause, thunderous ovation for the great information, the great stories that they have shared. We're so grateful to them. And as we said, please know that you're going to have their contact information. So if there were questions that we couldn't answer, if there's ways that you can get involved and share your expertise, we want to continue that after this hour-long session, because we want to have more success stories like the one Dr. Cohen shared with us moments ago. My pleasure to be with you all today as moderator, and really enjoyed all 3 of our presenters and all of you for joining us and asking some great questions. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday and have a terrific rest of the summer.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
See you soon.
Yeah.